Hey, girl, you make my heart skip a beat. Oh, okay, I'm back.
Oh, don't put those back in yet.
What's the capital of Alaska? I don't know.
Wrong.
What's the capital of Mississippi? I don't know.
Wrong.
Oh, I knew.
I can't get pregnant ever again.
You haven't been with me.
Good morning. It's Monday, Medal of Honor Monday, March the 4th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and the Medal of Honor. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now a little bit of Mafia action.
I don't know of anybody, I never heard of anybody that went into the program that ever got killed afterwards.
You mean witness protection?
Witness protection program, yeah.
But I mean, not everyone goes to witness protection.
No. Well, listen, Vlad, if you're suspected of being an informant on the street, you're going to go. I mean, there's no question. So if you don't get to the point where you're already cooperating and already protected by the government, and we find out about it, you're going to go, no doubt.
How many people do you know outside of Whitey Bulger who actually got killed after they took the stand and basically told on a bunch of people?
After they took the stand, I can't think of anybody. You know, one guy that we found out was an informant and got killed before was Willie Boy Johnson. He was in Gotti's crew, somebody that I worked with or shot like a money with him. But I don't know of anybody that took the stand and then got killed afterwards. At least it doesn't come to, my mind right.
It was when Michael Francis was talking about the Colombo War.
The new mob war on the streets of New York.
Like he was talking about it like he was there. Then he says, oh, well, I was in prison.
Bullets are flying and the body count is rising fast.
We haven't seen it in this proportion for some years. It looks like it's a classic mob war.
And then he was talking about his crew. None of his crew or quote-unquote crew was on the street. I was. He wasn't. His crew wasn't. I didn't see nobody in his crew on the street, and I didn't hear anything from any of his crew being on the street. And I do take exception with that. The reason why, because a lot of guys did get killed. Okay, so don't be saying something because I was there. And he used to say that he used to go down to Carroll Street all the time, down to the Diplomat. I was in the Diplomat 7 days a week. I never seen him there. I met him twice. Once when I was coming out of Monty's, I got introduced to him. Once when I was going into Monty's, a hello and goodbye, and that was it.
What really happened with Jimmy Hoffa?
Look, he did get on the wrong side of people. When he came out of prison, he was told to lay low and just stay back. And he refused to do that, didn't want to give up his position. There's no question he was taken out by my former associates. Now, the question is always, where is he buried? That's what everybody wants to know. They will never find Jimmy's body. Never. Now, I had nothing to do with it, but, you hear things in that life. Let's put it this way. If you wanted to find his body or try to find his body, you'd have to look in a very wet place.
And how deep is this wet place?
Pretty deep. Pretty deep. I know that for a fact.
100%.
100%.
Do you know location?
Well, I knew the general area. A friend that I hadn't seen for a long time came out of prison maybe 2.5 years ago. He recorded a tape that I have in my possession. That tape spells everything out. He was with the Judah. People have been trying to get that tape from me for a long time.
In every space, there is the power players that you see that you know of on TV, right? And then there's power players you don't see that the people you think are power players know who the real power player is, right? Was there ever a person that the street thought was the power player, but behind closed doors in the mob, the person that really held it all together that everybody feared was XYZ? Yeah. Was that person in your world?
Yes.
Who was that person?
That was Chin Gigante.
Chin was?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Everybody thought it was Tony Salerno who was the boss, but it was really Chin. He was the power in all of New York at that time.
And you think there are Chins in every space?
I think so, yeah. I do. Absolutely. That we don't know about. Well, a lot of times you're protecting somebody from your own, The way I got involved in the gas business, very simple. Two guys were extorting Larry Irizzo, you know that name. They were trying to get involved and get a piece of his company. They were shaking him down. And eventually they would have done that, okay? Threats of violence, the whole thing. Larry came to me to protect me from them. And so I said, okay, if you're with me, nobody's going to bother you except me. So how are we going to make money together? Because what benefit of it, is it to me to protect you from them if I don't get a benefit out of it? And that's when we started to talk about, defrauding the government. So most of the times you're being protected from our own.
It's absolutely untrue.
Michael Franzese's career as a movie producer was interrupted, and he was in handcuffs, arrested by the FBI on racketeering charges. Authorities describe Franzese as a young, rich, and dangerous mafia boss.
PayPal, Venmo, anything over $600, they have to report. They don't want you to earn one penny, not one penny, without paying tax on it. They want every cent that they can grab off us. What people don't realize, everything we do is taxed. Everything. How much more do you want?
They want it all.
And they called us bad guys.
They're trying to get rid of cash. I love cash. I'm used to, as a gangster, even when I got a credit card, I like cash in my pocket. And they want to get rid of it because they don't know what you're doing with it.
Don't say that too loud, Sammy. You're going to get a visit from the IRS. They're going to want to know how much cash you got in the house.
I'm going to tell them I have 1, 2, and 3,000 in my pocket.
That's a good answer.
Did you kill anybody?
You can't be a mafia captain for that length of time in charge of a number of people and not kill people, can you?
Well, Pierce, let me put it this way. You know, it's a violent life at times. And if you're part of the life, you're part of the violence. And yeah, as a captain, I was given an order, was told what to do, I did it.
But you would personally kill people?
No, I didn't say that. But I knew when it happened.
You would order people to be killed?
I didn't order it, but if I had to carry out
you're being a bit,
I did it.
If you don't mind me saying, you're being a bit weaselly with the words, because if the order came down, it was your job to make sure that order got executed, literally.
Yeah.
People got killed.
People got killed.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't feel good about it. You know, Jordan Peterson asked me this question, and he said, Michael, if you had to commit an act like that, what would you do? And I said, well, you know, maybe I stepped out of myself for a moment and then stepped back in later on. Because, listen, murder is never pleasant.
Listen, you come to Philadelphia anytime. You see what you want, any size, any shape. Right, we'll get it for you. A nice Italian girl, loose spaghetti and meatballs. Oh, I prefer boys. Excuse me, I didn't catch that.
I'll tell you a story with Tony. He calls me up one day. He says, come and see me. So, you know, boss of another family calls me. And he says, hey, Mike, what are you doing with this gas business? I said, Tony, I'm doing good. He said, you making money? I said, yeah, Tony, no complaints. I'm making good. He said, I got these 5 Mamalukes around me. They can't earn 3 cents. Yeah, just like that. He says, you give them a job? I said, yeah, Tony, I'll take care. Don't worry. He said, what will you do? I said, well, I got a bunch of gas stations. How about I put them in charge of a gas station and they'll watch it for me? I said, but Tony, don't let them rob me. You know these guys, they rob you. I'll cut off their hands, their ears.
Oh, fuck.
I said, you don't have to do that.
They really do it?
Yeah. Oh, he said, how much you going to pay him? So now I'm thinking, I don't want to insult the boss, right? I says, Tony, I said, how about I give him $1,500 a week in cash each? He says, 1,500? Give them 500. Give me the 1,000. He was a character. He's a powerful guy.
And that was a little bit of Mafia action. Back in a minute.
It helped that I was an Eagle Scout, and they signed me to a very high-sounding job, and it was Combat Intelligence School. Basically, Combat Intelligence School is nothing but a scout and observer. That lasted 8 weeks, and they taught you how to operate a 560 radio. They taught you demolitions. They taught you map reading, and they taught you a little Japanese, which was useless. The nighttime patrolling, which actually, when it was in combat, we did do that. Rubber boat reconnaissance, which we never did. The frogmen in the Navy did that, and that's where I was trained. We also were taught how to operate a 50 caliber and 25 caliber machine gun, a BAR, Browning automatic rifle, and of course the M1 rifle, which every Marine had, even the cooks and bakers.
These Humvees are dropped from a plane. There are up to 10 Humvees per drop, each weighing more than 2.5 tons, launched from cargo aircraft like the C-17. Every vehicle is positioned on a small platform, covered by durable cardboard, and fitted with a parachute. The parachute opens on its own, as it works roughly in the same way as when humans use parachutes. The Low-Altitude Parachute Extraction System, or LAPIS, is the name of the entire machine. In just a few minutes, you can precisely drop over 30 vehicles over a region with only a small number of planes, and the Humvees smash into the ground with insane power. But things can go wrong. This happened during U.S. military training in Germany a few years ago. On 3 Humvees, the cables connecting the parachutes to the pallets broke. There was even an M551 Sheridan tank that was airdropped back in the 1970s. However, at the moment, only light armored vehicles are used for these kinds of operations, since tanks are just too risky. If one was to land on someone, it wouldn't be ideal whatsoever.
While participating in a helicopter rescue mission to extract elements of a platoon which had inadvertently entered a minefield while attacking enemy positions, Private First Class Raymond Clausen skillfully guided the helicopter pilot to a landing in an area cleared by one of several mine explosions. With 11 Marines wounded and 1 dead, and the remaining 8 Marines holding their positions for fear of detonating other mines, Clausen quickly leaped from the helicopter. In the face of enemy fire, he moved across the extremely hazardous mine-laden area to assist in carrying casualties to the waiting helicopter and in placing them aboard. Despite the ever-present threat of further mine explosions, he continued his valiant efforts, leaving the comparatively safe area of the helicopter on 6 separate occasions to carry out rescue efforts. On one occasion, while he was carrying one of the wounded, another mine detonated, killing a corpsman and wounding 3 other men. Only when he was certain that all Marines were safely aboard did he signal the pilot to lift the helicopter. By the courageous, determined, and inspiring efforts in the face of the utmost danger, Private First Class Clausen upheld the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and of the U.S. Naval Service.
As he looked out at the throng of adoring fans, he could hardly believe his good fortune. A few years earlier, he was a miserable grunt at Fort Jackson in South Carolina, trying to survive the loneliness and discipline of Army basic training. And now Jim Croce was on the cusp of superstardom, with several songs topping the charts. My time in the Army was memorable, he joked with the crowd. I learned how to use a mop for a weapon, and I also met this guy from the south side of Chicago named Leroy Brown. He was badder than King Kong and meaner than a junkyard dog, he said to Giggles. It was the evening of September 30th, 1973, and Jim was eager to finish the tour and get back home to his wife Ingrid and their newborn son. He had mailed a letter just hours before stepping onto that stage for what turned out to be his final performance. I'm going to quit touring so I can be there for you and AJ from now on, a homesick Croce wrote. We have a lifetime to spend together. Love always, Jim.
I had 2 stragglers. They didn't want to die, so they thought by staying with me, they'd be safe. Unfortunately, by staying with me, they were drawing fire from the hills. The first guy got hit, ripped his stomach open. Fortunately, he lived. This guy lived. And the other guy that was 2 feet away from me, he was a redheaded kid. The machine gun took his helmet off and part of his brain, a part of it. And he was crying, help me, help me, help me. I had no morphine. I couldn't help him. So he fell at my feet. And he was crying, help me, help me, help me. I had nothing in my kit to help him. So the only thing I had was the Lord's Prayer. And I started praying, Our Father who art in heaven. I never finished it. And he slumped down. I knew he was going to die. And I reached down and I squeezed his hand. I want him to know that he wasn't alone. And he died. He died. He was just a little boy. Just a little boy.
UK says Germany can go to hell, with the German chancellor inferring that the British and the French have troops in Ukraine already. When asked why Germany couldn't send long-range missiles after pressuring others to do so, the squeamish Scholz said, this is a very far-reaching weapon, and what the British and French are doing in terms of target control and support for target control cannot be done in Germany. You had the UK's Ben Wallace responding, saying Scholz is the wrong man in the wrong job at the wrong time, and the UK's parliament saying his inference was wrong, irresponsible, and a slap in the face to allies. Meanwhile, as of recording, France doesn't have a comment on the matter, but a French MP said Berlin was isolated in Europe. Meanwhile, Putin threatened to use nuclear weapons on Europe for the first time in a while, saying that if the West sends troops to Ukraine, they could use nuclear weapons on their cities. And this comes as documents have been leaked showing that Russia has an extremely low threshold to use nuclear weapons, with both being massive indicators that Putin is legitimately scared that the Western powers will end his war in Ukraine, especially as Russia would be decimated by a European intervention. So it seems his only hope is to threaten to destroy the world. But as always, things are developing, so follow to stay in the loop.
Russia's most advanced fighter jet, the Su-57, is in serious trouble. Introduced to the Russian Air Force in 2020, this advanced aircraft is supposed to be Russia's answer to the F-35 and F-22. But there's a problem. As of today, Russia has only built a handful of Su-57s, and they're barely present in the skies over Ukraine. One reason for this is that to lose one would be a PR disaster for Russia. Not only could sensitive technology fall into Western hands, embarrassing enough on its own, it would also make the Su-57 much less appealing to foreign buyers. Then there's its stealth capabilities. You see, there's good reason to believe the Su-57 isn't nearly as stealthy as Russia claims. In fact, according to some aviation experts, the range at which it can be picked up on radar is 6 to 10 times greater than that of the F-35. All in all, this makes the Su-57 a cool-looking yet vulnerable and expensive aircraft that will no doubt continue to fall short of the hype.
He stepped off his helicopter into the stifling heat, the fetid air nearly suffocating him. It was July 1970, and the location was United States Army Camp Holloway in Pleiku, Vietnam. Though he served 2 years in the Marine Corps in the late 1940s, he narrowly missed combat in both World War II and Korea. But he desperately wanted to give thanks to the men and women in uniform who were sacrificing their lives on the other side of the planet and had gone largely forgotten. His name was George Peppard, and he was a star of film and television, though his most iconic role as renegade Army Commando John Hannibal Smith on the A-Team was still to come. He traveled solo to Vietnam, staying 2 weeks and meeting over 5,000 servicemen and women, and on more than one occasion came under enemy fire. Man, he had a distant blank look on his face this one time when we was filming a flashback scene, noted his A-Team co-star, Mr. T, years later. When I asked if he was okay, all he said was, "I wish I had done more."
Why has Australia buried their fighter jets underground? The reason behind it is dangerous. Bulldozers were used to fill a pit with soil after 23 F-111 fighter planes were put there. But before that, the aircraft's electronics were all taken out and sent to the Royal Australian Air Force. They also removed the engines, but those were scrapped. Even though the engines were very powerful for their time, they were just too flammable. Pilots today can't be put at this kind of risk. It was for this exact reason the USA stopped the F-111 in the 1990s. However, they were still flown by Australia's Air Force until 2010. But there was a big problem with the fuselage. It was built with panels that had some asbestos in them. The fighter jets would have needed to be dismantled very carefully and expensively in a specialized facility in order to recycle the fuselage without risk to human health. It would have cost too much to do this, so they decided to just bury them. With this method, the old jets are disposed of safely, and there is no chance of asbestos exposure.
The downing of Ebro 33 shows just how far the U.S. military will go to bring back one of its allies. You see, on August 30th, 1995, a French Mirage, call sign Ebro 33, was shot down over Serbian territory during Operation Deliberate Force. The two crew members ejected and were immediately captured by local Serbians. But NATO forces didn't know that. And despite failing to make radio contact with the downed pilots, they decided to go ahead with not one, but 3 daring rescue operations. The first package was launched from the USS Roosevelt, but they had to turn back due to thick storm clouds blocking their path. The next day, bad weather forced them back again, and a helicopter was hit by Serbian fire. It was not until the third attempt that they made it to the area, but even after a thorough search, they were unable to make contact. Then, just as they were leaving, 8 anti-aircraft guns opened fire on them, seriously wounding 2 men on board. No further attempts were made, but the heroic effort set an important example.
Going to Vegas, right?
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of motivation.
Listen up, fellow Stoics of the digital age. You've stumbled upon a golden treasure, and no, I'm not talking about the latest viral video or meme. If you've ever found yourself scrolling through social media, sighing at the pressures of today's world, wondering why you can't just let things go, or simply wanting to care a tad bit less about every little thing, then you, my friend, are in the right place. You see, long before our modern-day challenges, some brilliant chaps known as the Stoics lived their lives based on principles that, believe it or not, can teach us how to master the art of not giving too many cares. Ironic, isn't it? That ancient wisdom can guide our smartphone-filled, caffeine-driven lives. Over the next bit of your time, you're going to discover 10 simple yet profoundly transformative Stoic principles. Principles so refreshing, they might just be the antidote to the chaos that is 21st century life. And hey, if you want to be the first to uncover more pearls of wisdom like these, go on and smack that notification bell and subscribe. What's the worst that could happen? You gain some wisdom. I challenge you, dare you even, to take that step. Welcome to the enlightening world of Stoicism, where old meets new, and where we get schooled in the art of keeping calm and carrying on. Now, shall we dive in? 1. Control what's within. Release what's without. Picture this. It's a rainy Tuesday morning. You've just prepared the perfect cup of tea, and right as you're about to sip, your cat knocks it over. The old you might have fumed, blamed Whiskers, or even the universe for conspiring against you. But here's a Stoic thought to chew on. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, said the legendary Seneca. Truth is, things happen. Teas spill. Cats are mischievous. What's within our control? Our reactions. Instead of letting our imagination paint a gloomy day ahead, We can choose to laugh it off and brew another cup. The world will keep throwing curveballs, but the power of our reactions, that's all ours. So the next time your Wi-Fi's acting up during that crucial Zoom call or your pizza arrives cold, take a deep breath. It's not the cold pizza that disturbs us, but our interpretation of it. 2. Embrace the present moment. Marcus Aurelius once mused, "Do not let the future disturb you, for you will arrive there if you nurture your present." It's the 21st century. We have notifications binging every second, and our thoughts race faster than our internet speed. Yet, what do we often miss? The now. Remember those days you walked in the park, but your mind was lost in tomorrow's tasks? Or those family dinners where your thoughts drifted to past regrets? The Stoics teach us that today, this very moment, is a gift. So why squander it worrying about the past or future? Being present isn't just about paying attention. It's about truly experiencing life, savoring your meals, listening to your friends, and feeling the wind on your face. Let go of yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's anxieties. In the grand tapestry of life, it's the little moments stitched together that define our happiness. 3. Accept change as nature's course. Ever noticed how effortlessly seasons change? Winter's frost melts to give spring its bloom. Yet when faced with life's alterations, be it a job switch, a breakup, or a move, we resist. As Epictetus wisely put it, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Life is ever-changing, as fluid as the River Thames. Fighting against the current is exhausting. Embracing it, that's where freedom lies. Life's nature is evolution. Just as Rome wasn't built in a day, you too are a masterpiece in progress. Every change, every twist and turn adds a unique brushstroke to your canvas. So, the next time you're faced with an unexpected detour, remember, it's all part of the grand design. 4. Detach from external validation. In today's world, with every like, share, and comment, we've become hooked on external validation. But consider this wisdom from Epictetus. Man is not worried by real problems so much as by his imagined anxieties about real problems. Isn't it strange that we let tiny icons on a screen dictate our mood? Stoicism urges us to find validation from within. Self-worth shouldn't be measured by online clout, but by personal values, actions, and character. The next time your post doesn't get the expected traction, or someone slides into your DMs with a snide comment, remember, your worth is not up for public voting. You're your own judge and jury. 5. Recognize life's natural cycles. Loss is painful, whether it's a favorite hoodie, a cherished memory, or a loved one. But, as Marcus Aurelius stated, loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. In the vast ecosystem of existence, everything has its season. Trees shed leaves only to sprout new ones. Similarly, life presents endings and beginnings, each teaching us, shaping us. Rather than clinging to what was, Stoicism invites us to appreciate life's impermanence. It's a call to live fully, love deeply, and let go gracefully. Every sunset, after all, makes way for a sunrise. 6. Seek growth in adversity. Who hasn't faced a challenge? Maybe it's that dreadful boss, the endless pile of bills, or the metro that's always late. It's easy to complain, to wish life was a bit kinder, but Seneca once proclaimed, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." Think of challenges as life's personal gym sessions for your soul. When hurdles appear, instead of asking, "Why me?" ponder, "What's this teaching me?" Every adversity carries a lesson, a potential for growth. It's just a matter of perspective. If Stoics were around today, they'd probably say, "Bring it on." 7. cultivate inner riches. In an age of opulent Instagram feeds and the constant show of affluence, it's easy to equate happiness with material gains. Yet, Seneca remarked, "It's not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more. That is poor." True wealth isn't about the latest gadgets or designer labels. It's the contentment of the soul, the richness of experiences, the treasure of memories. The Stoics remind us that while it's okay to enjoy life's luxuries, one shouldn't be enslaved by them. For in the end, it's the stories we've woven, not the possessions we've accumulated, that truly matter. 8. Understand and accept fate. Now, I'm not saying you should blindly accept everything, but as Epictetus pointed out, don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen. Life, with its myriad complexities, is a blend of our efforts and the universe's designs. Sometimes, despite our best moves, the outcome isn't in our favor, but instead of being bogged down by what didn't go as planned, Stoicism nudges us to embrace what's on our plate. After all, the most captivating stories often emerge from the most unexpected turns. 9. Be of service to others. We live in a world bursting with opportunities to make a difference. As Seneca reminds us, we are all bound together in a partnership. Stoicism isn't just about personal enlightenment, it's about community upliftment. By aiding another, we not only enrich their lives, but add meaning to our own. Whether it's helping a neighbor, volunteering, or simply being there for a friend, every act of kindness echoes in the universe. Remember, it's not just about thriving solo, but elevating others along the journey. 10. Reflect, review, and realign. The bustling world doesn't often grant us pauses. Yet, as Marcus Aurelius noted, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Regular reflection is the mirror to our souls. Taking a moment to introspect helps us identify our patterns, realign our paths, and refresh our perspectives. Consider it a regular system update for your life. Ponder upon your actions, learn from missteps, and celebrate small wins. For in understanding oneself, we pave the path to true contentment and peace. These 10 principles aren't about being emotionless or aloof. They're about fostering resilience, embracing the present, and leading a life of purpose and depth. Well, my delightful virtual companions, as we draw the curtain on this enlightening journey through the hallowed halls of Stoicism, I can't help but reflect on how these age-old principles seem to fit so snugly into our frantic modern existence. Just goes to show, some truths are truly timeless, eh? Now, I've got a cheeky little challenge for you all.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the daily laws for March 3rd and March 4th.
March 3rd. Cultivate the craftsman ethic. The great masters, including contemporary ones, all managed to retain the craftsman spirit. What motivates them is not money, fame, or a high position, but making the perfect work of art, designing the best building, discovering some new scientific law, mastering their craft. This helps them to not get too caught up in the ups and downs of their career. It is the work that matters. And in the end, these masters end up making more money and become more famous by cultivating this spirit. Steve Jobs personified this craftsman ethic. He inherited it from his father, a man who loved to build things with his hands. And the love of perfection, for making something just right, is an attitude he transferred to the design of products for Apple. That's the master's goal, to make things well and to feel pride in it. Daily law. Retain the craftsman spirit. Keep in mind, the work is the only thing that matters. Robert Greene. 5 Key Elements for a New Model of Apprenticeship. The New York Times, February 26, 2013. March 4th. The creative process. Because the creative process is an elusive subject and one for which we receive no training, we often go quite wrong. From masters throughout the ages, we can discern an elemental pattern in principles that have wide application. First, it is essential to build into the creative process an initial period that is open-ended. You give yourself time to dream and wander, to start out in a loose and unfocused manner. In this period, you allow the project to associate itself with certain powerful emotions, ones that naturally come out of you as you focus on your ideas. It is always easy to tighten up your ideas later and to make your project increasingly realistic and rational. Second, it is best to have wide knowledge of your field and other fields, giving your brain more possible associations and connections. Third, to keep this process alive, you must never settle into complacency, as if your initial vision represents the end point. You must cultivate profound dissatisfaction with your work and the need to constantly improve your ideas, along with a sense of uncertainty. You are not exactly sure where to go next, and this uncertainty drives the creative urge and keeps it fresh. Finally, you must come to embrace slowness as a virtue in itself. When it comes to creative endeavors, time is always relative. Whether your project takes months or years to complete, you will always experience a sense of impatience and a desire to get to the end. The single greatest action you can take for acquiring creative power is to reverse this natural impatience. Daily law. Imagine yourself years in the future looking back at the work you have done. From that future vantage point, the extra months and years you devoted to the process will not seem painful or laborious at all. Time is your greatest ally. Mastery, Chapter 5. Awaken the dimensional mind, the creative active.
And that was the Daily Laws for March the 3rd, March the 4th, from The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
I came of age in the period after Vatican II when we did, for different reasons. I'm not blaming those who did it, but we kind of softened the operation in many ways. We did rather feminize the language and style. And men, I think, respond to being challenged. They want hard, difficult things to do. They want a sense of mission and purpose. And I think we got pretty bad at doing that. I'll tell you exactly what it was. The instinct, we better be as kind of nice and inviting as we can. Otherwise, they're going to run away. We're going to lose the young people unless we, make it as easy for them as possible. Well, of course, it's this irony that it had the opposite effect. That's, in a way, why they ran away, that we didn't make it hard and challenging. Make it more demanding, and young men will find it more enticing.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, so long as men believe that the initiation of physical force by some men against others is a proper part of an organized society, hatred, violence, brutality, destruction, slaughter, and the savage gang warfare of group against group are all they can or will achieve. Unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we'll pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
The divide and conquer strategy has never been more effective than it is today. Cut people off from their group, make them feel alienated, alone, and unprotected, and you weaken them enormously. That moment of weakness gives you great power to maneuver them into a corner, whether to seduce or to induce panic and retreat. Throughout the 1960s, one of Mao Zedong's most loyal and trusted followers was his Minister of Defense, Lin Biao. No one praised the Chinese ruler more fulsomely than Lin. And yet by 1970, Mao had come to suspect that the flattery was a ruse to disguise his intentions. Lin was plotting to be his successor. And what made Lin particularly dangerous was that, as Minister of Defense, he had accumulated allies in the military. Mao went to work with great subtlety. In public, he went out of his way to support Lin, as if he too saw the minister as his successor. That soothed the natural wariness of the plotter. At the same time, however, Mao also attacked and demoted some of Lin's most important supporters in the military. Lin was a bit of a radical, veering left on most issues. Mao urged him to propose some of his more extreme ideas for restructuring the military, secretly knowing that these ideas would prove unpopular. Lin's support among the higher branches of the military slowly began to thin. Lin finally realized what Mao was up to, but it was too late. He had lost his power base. Frustrated and scared, he resorted to plotting a coup d'etat, a desperate act that played straight into Mao's hands. In 1971, Lin died under suspicious circumstances in a plane crash. As Mao understood, in political environments, people depend on their connections even more than on their talents. In such a world, a person whose career seems to be waning is one whom few will want to know. And people who feel isolated will often overreact and do something desperate, which of course just makes them more isolated. So Mao created the impression that Lin was losing his connections. Had he attacked Lin directly, he would have gotten bogged down in an ugly fight. Dividing the minister from his power base, and in the process making him appear to be on the decline, was much more effective. Before you launch an outright attack on your enemies, it is always wise first to weaken them by creating as much division in their ranks as possible. One good place to drive a wedge is between the leadership and the people, whether soldiers or citizenry. Leaders function poorly when they lose their support among the people. So work to make them look authoritarian or out of touch. Or steal their foundation, as the Republican President Richard Nixon did in 1972 by wooing the blue-collar types who had traditionally voted Democrat. He split the Democrats' base. The Republicans have been doing the same thing ever since. Remember, once your enemy begins to splinter in any way, the rupture will tend to gain momentum. Division usually leads to more division. In 338 BC, Rome defeated its greatest enemy at the time, the Latin League, a confederation of Italian cities that had formed to block Rome's expansion. With this victory, however, the Romans faced a new problem: how to govern the region. If they crushed the League's members, they would leave a power vacuum, and down the road another enemy would emerge that might prove a still greater threat. If they simply swallowed up the cities of the League, they would dilute the power and prestige of Rome, giving themselves too large an area to protect and police. The solution the Romans came up with, which they would later call divide et impera, divide and rule, was to become the strategy by which they forged their empire. Essentially, they broke up the League, but did not treat all of its parts equally. Instead, they created a system whereby some of its cities were incorporated into Roman territory, and their residents given full privileges as Roman citizens. Others were deprived of most of their territory, but granted near total independence. And others still were broken up and heavily colonized with Roman citizens. No single city was left powerful enough to challenge Rome, which retained the central position. As the saying goes, all roads led to Rome. The key to the system was that if an independent city proved itself loyal enough to Rome, or fought well enough for Rome, it won the chance of being incorporated into the empire. The individual cities now saw it as more in their interest to gain Rome's favor than to ally themselves elsewhere. Rome held out the prospect of great power, wealth, and protection, while isolation from Rome was dangerous. And so the once proud members of the Latin League now competed against one another for Rome's attention. Divide and rule is a powerful strategy for governing any group. It is based on a key principle. Within any organization, people naturally form smaller groups based on mutual self-interest, the primitive desire to find strength in numbers. These subgroups form power bases that, left unchecked, will threaten the organization as a whole. The formation of parties and factions can be a leader's greatest threat, for in time, these factions will naturally work to secure their own interests before those of the greater group. The solution is to divide to rule. To do so, you must first establish yourself as the center of power. Individuals must know they need to compete for your approval. There has to be more to be gained by pleasing the leader than by trying to form a power base within the group. When Elizabeth I became queen, England was a nation divided. The remnants of feudalism entailed many competing power centers, and the court itself was full of factions. Elizabeth's solution was to weaken the nobility by deliberately pitting one family against another. At the same time, she occupied the center, making herself a symbol of England itself, the hub around which everything revolved. Within the court, too, she made sure that no individual, except of course herself, gained ascendancy. When she saw that first Robert Dudley and then the Earl of Essex believed themselves her favorites, she quickly cut them loose. The temptation to maintain a favorite is understandable but dangerous. Better to rotate your stars, occasionally making each one fall. Bring in people with different viewpoints and encourage them to fight it out. You can justify this as a healthy form of democracy, but the effect is that while those below you fight to be heard, you rule. The film director Alfred Hitchcock faced enemies on all sides: writers, set designers, actors, producers, marketers, any of them quite capable of putting their egos before the quality of the film. Writers wanted to show off their literary skills. Actors wanted to look like stars. Producers and marketers wanted the movie to be commercial. The whole crew had competing interests. Hitchcock's solution, like Queen Elizabeth's, was to take the central position in a variant of divide and rule. His carefully crafted role as a public celebrity was part of this. His movies' publicity campaigns always involved him as spokesperson, and he made bit-part appearances in most of his films, becoming an instantly recognizable, endearingly humorous figure. He put himself in the middle of every aspect of production, from writing the script before the shoot began to editing the film when the shoot was finished. At the same time, he kept all the filmmaking departments, even that of the producer, a little out of the loop. Information about every detail of the film was kept in his head, his drawings, and his notes. No one could bypass him. Every decision went through him. Before the film was shot, for example, Hitchcock would set out in detail the look of the leading lady's costumes. If the costume designer wanted to change anything, she would have to go through him or be caught out in rank insubordination. In essence, he was like Rome. All roads led to Hitchcock. Within your group, factions may emerge quite subtly by virtue of the fact that people who are experts in their area may not tell you everything they're doing. Remember, they see only the small picture. You are in charge of the whole production. If you are to lead, you must occupy the center. Everything must flow through you. If information is to be withheld, you are the one to do it. That is divide and rule. If the different parts of the operation lack access to all the information, they will have to come to you to get it. It is not that you micromanage, but that you keep overall control of everything vital and isolate any potential rival power base. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Major General Edward Lansdale was considered America's principal expert in counterinsurgency. Working with President Ramon Magsaysay of the Philippines, he had crafted a plan that had defeated the country's Huk guerrilla movement in the early 1950s. Counterinsurgency requires a deft hand, more political than military, and for Lansdale, the key to success was to stamp out government corruption and bring the people close to the government through various popular programs.
And that was the next part of Chapter 17, Defeat Them in Detail, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, a right-thinking Democrat, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican. We are the true party of government. We are the ones that love government. The Democrat Party just loves power. Back in a minute. Thank you. So the left is bluffing. They're always bluffing. And once I know that they are using fear to bully and intimidate people and using various tricks to silence me, then I'm able to lose my fear and regain my effectiveness. One of their prevalent tricks is attitude. The left will act as if. They act as if certain things are inevitable, for instance, and they've used the false confidence to promote the legalization of marijuana. The solution? We can do the same thing. We can act as if the complete abolition of abortion is inevitable. After all, Roe v. Wade is already gone. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the next chapter of World War II Heroes, Medal of Honor recipients in World War II and their heroic stories.
Chapter 4, Commander Richard O'Kane. In the last stages of the war in Europe, American and British bomber and fighter crews essentially ran out of targets. Virtually all German cities of any size had been destroyed. There were few German fighting vehicles left on the roads. Most of the locomotives and railroads of the country had been obliterated. By the beginning of May 1945, there was essentially nothing of real strategic or tactical value for Allied air power to attack. In the Pacific, the same held true at sea. Though the most well-known submarine commanders of World War II were the U-boat commanders of the German Navy, by far the most successful were the American submarine commanders of the Pacific Fleet. One of these was Commander Richard O'Kane, 1911 to 1994. By the end of the war, the Japanese had lost over 8 million tons of shipping. An estimated 3 million tons of this were naval vessels. The rest were merchant vessels. 60% of the warships and merchant ships were sunk by U.S. submarines. These included 8 aircraft carriers of various sizes, 1 battleship, and 11 cruisers. By the end of the war, American subs had virtually run out of targets and were forced to fire upon the sampan sailing ships that Japan was reduced to relying upon for what small amount of resources they could get from overseas. 288 American submarines put to sea during the war. 52 were destroyed, 48 of these in the Pacific. Submarine crews comprised just over 1.5% of the Navy, yet 22% of submarine crews were killed in action. That is 1 out of every 5 men. The success of the submarine force was such that in the last few months of the war, Japanese food rations were virtually nil. The Japanese had virtually no resources with which to defend their country. Because of the naval blockade of the bombing campaign of the Japanese islands, Japanese industry ceased to exist in any effective fashion. Commander O'Kane was the most proficient and deadly American submarine commander of the war. To illustrate the level of dedication to duty, professional excellence, and bravery possessed by Commander O'Kane, let's look at a list of the citations he received, aside from the Medal of Honor. Submarines he served on or commanded received 3 Presidential Unit citations. He received the Purple Heart for being wounded in action. He was awarded the Legion of Merit, which recognizes conduct in the performance of outstanding service. He won the Silver Star for bravery 3 times. The Navy Cross, the second highest award for valor the Navy can bestow, the first being the Medal of Honor, was also awarded to O'Kane 3 times. The Navy Commendation Medal, which is roughly equivalent to the Bronze Star, but for sustained duty, was awarded to O'Kane twice. He received the Prisoner of War Medal. He was taken prisoner by the Japanese after the action, which won him the Medal of Honor. By any measure, Richard O'Kane was an exceptionally brave human being and a great leader of men. O'Kane was born in Dover, New Hampshire in 1911 and graduated from the Naval Academy in 1934. His first duty was on surface vessels, but 4 years later he was transferred to the submarine fleet. In 1942, with America now at war, O'Kane was assigned to the crew of the new submarine USS Wahoo. American submarines at the time were named after fish, under the command of Commander Marvin Kennedy, an excellent officer, and then under the command of Commander Dudley Morton, whose nickname was Mush. Morton was one of the innovators of American submarine warfare, and in serving as his executive officer, O'Kane learned the skills that would serve him well for the rest of the war. One of the benefits of serving under Morton probably equipped O'Kane for the captain's chair. The commanding officer of any ship is called captain, no matter what their rank. On most submarines, the exec figured out the plots of targets and the analysis that goes with hunting other vessels at sea, while the captain manned the periscope. Already proficient at this skill under Morton's command, the roles were reversed by the captain's choice. This gave O'Kane the experience he normally would not have received until he became a captain himself. Under Kennedy and Morton, O'Kane and the Wahoo performed 5 war patrols, sinking numerous Japanese vessels. After O'Kane's appointment as captain of another sub, the Tang, Morton went on a dangerous mission in Japanese waters, and the Wahoo was never heard from again. Years later, review of Japanese naval records revealed the Wahoo had likely been sunk by a Japanese anti-submarine aircraft on the surface. In July 1943, O'Kane was named commanding officer of the new sub USS Tang, a Baleo-class submarine, and oversaw its construction and the choice of crew. By October, the Tang was operational. The Baleo class was the newest American submarine in 1943 and the largest of the war. It was powered by a diesel-electric engine, diesel on the surface, electric while submerged, that could propel the sub through the water at 25 knots surfaced and almost 9 knots submerged. The boat, submarines are referred to as boats in the Navy, surface vessels are ships, was a football field long, 311 feet, and weighed 1,500 tons surfaced and 2,300 tons submerged. Water is taken on in measured fashion to allow a submarine to submerge. The test depth of the sub was 400 feet, although the Tang set the record 612 feet while evading a Japanese destroyer. The sub was strengthened over earlier U.S. subs with a stronger pressure hull, the outside hull which was more flexible to accommodate the intense water pressure at depth, and a strong inner hull as well. Baleo-class subs also came equipped with 10 21-inch circumference torpedoes, 1 5-inch deck gun, and 4 and aft 20 and 40 millimeter anti-aircraft cannons. Tang carried 10 officers and 68 crewmen. On February 17, 1944, Tang saw her first combat. She was in the Caroline Marianas Islands area, east of the Philippines and north of New Guinea. Sighting a convoy of 7 Japanese merchant and transport ships, O'Kane went on the attack, but was soon attacked by a Japanese destroyer escort. Diving deep, the Tang underwent several tense moments while 5 depth charges, canisters filled with explosives rigged to explode at a certain depth, exploded around her. The escort, perhaps believing Tang was sunk, soon left the area, and O'Kane raised the boat to periscope depth and resumed the attack on the Japanese convoy. Tang sunk 1 transport ship before returning to depth. 5 days later, she sank another vessel, then found another convoy and sank another transport an hour after the first. This was the beginning of a short run which would make the Tang the most successful U.S. submarine of the war. Her second war patrol involved air-sea rescue of downed ships. On one mission, she rescued 22 downed airmen. This was one of the actions for which the Tang received the Presidential Unit Citation. Over the course of the next 3 war patrols, O'Kane and Tang would sink between 31 and 33 Japanese ships, equaling hundreds of thousands of tons. In October of 1944, O'Kane took Tang into the China Sea and the area between mainland China and Formosa, as Taiwan was then called. The Japanese occupied both, and this was a dangerous mission, as the area contained many minefields and was one of the few remaining areas in the Pacific where the Japanese Navy still held sway. The enemy knew that American submarines were there. O'Kane and others made no doubt of that. On October 10th, Tang sank 2 ships. She continued to patrol the large area, and on the 23rd, she spotted a large convoy of Japanese ships. This convoy consisted of numerous naval escort vessels and 5 merchant transport vessels. The submarine commanders of the U.S. Navy in World War II, and since, were known for their aggressiveness, and the idea of one sub challenging this convoy was not at all unheard of. Contrary to what most people believe, most submarine attacks that occurred during World War I and World War II did not occur when the submarine was submerged. The favorite tactic of the infamous German U-boats was the night surface attack. The low profile of the sub made it very hard to spot, especially on a moonless night. Remember also that the ships of a convoy are not right next to each other, which gives the sub some room to maneuver. Additionally, on the surface, the submarine was much faster than when submerged. This is what O'Kane decided he would do. Stealthily, Tang got in the midst of the convoy and began her attack. She attacked 2 vessels almost simultaneously. The first vessel was hit amidship, the center, and the second one in the stern, the rear. Both caught fire and began to sink. Immediately behind her, the Tang sighted a Japanese tanker and prepared to fire her stern torpedoes at her. You must remember that in order to do this, a submarine's crew, from the commander on down, has to work with the utmost precision under terrific pressure. The calculations and the danger are almost unprecedented. While he was preparing to fire, O'Kane saw that one of the transport vessels was closing on the sub and preparing to ram her. When a large transport or warship rammed a sub, it was almost always the sub that came out on the losing end. In order for a sub to dive, she needs space, and at this point, Tang did not have enough, so O'Kane ordered her to pass through the transport's path at full speed, and turning at the last second, managed to avoid the transport, which almost took the back of the sub off. What this did was cause the transport and the tanker that Tang had been targeting to come to a collision course with each other. They struck each other and presented O'Kane with one long, already damaged stationary target. Both ships were sunk with a volley of 4 torpedoes. With destroyers and other naval escorts closing in, Tang dove and avoided them. The next day, she continued her patrol. In the evening, O'Kane spotted a very large Japanese convoy directly off the Chinese coast. Following the convoy, O'Kane waited for his opportunity, which came when ships of the convoy got jumpy and began to signal one another with searchlights. This was the moment Commander O'Kane had been waiting for, as the searchlights illuminated the convoy. Tang fired a spread of torpedoes at 3 transports. 2 torpedoes, known as fish to submariners, headed for each target. This all happened within moments. As Tang's targets were anywhere between 900 and 1,400 yards away, it took some time for the torpedoes to find their targets. While these fish were in the water, O'Kane took up a parallel course with the convoy, waiting for another target. While the forward tubes were being reloaded, O'Kane had his boat fire its stern tubes against 2 targets on Tang's rear. Still on the surface, Tang accelerated to full speed to avoid fire coming from Japanese escorts. As she was doing this, a Japanese destroyer came at her full speed ahead. Unfortunately for the enemy destroyer, this put her directly in the path of the torpedoes that were headed for the tanker that Tang had fired on with her stern tubes. In rapid succession, torpedoes from Tang hit 3 targets aft of her and 2 to her bow. The warship exploded and was completely destroyed, as did one of the transport supply ships. The 3 others targeted by Tang sunk more slowly. The explosions of Tang's targets apparently damaged another ship, which O'Kane noticed limping along slowly. At 2:30 a.m. on October 25, 1944, Tang fired the last torpedo it had aboard and crippled the transport. The standard torpedoes of the U.S. subfleet in World War II were the Mark 14 and Mark 18, and both were fraught with problems. Production of the Mark 14 was halted in the last 2 years of the war, but stores were such that it was used by subs, PT, patrol torpedo boats, destroyers, and destroyer escorts until the end of the war. The Mark 18, though a better weapon, was still plagued with occasional problems. Both of these weapons were gyroscope-guided, and at times errors in both calculations and machinery would lead to premature explosions and/or the torpedo circling back on its mother ship and exploding. This is exactly what happened to the Tang on the morning of October 24th. The torpedo left the surfaced submarine, surfaced itself, and began a circular course which would lead it to strike the aft torpedo room of Tang, which had tried to evade its own weapon unsuccessfully. The explosion in the rear of the boat was so violent that men in the front sections received broken bones. O'Kane and other officers had been outside on the conning tower shouting down orders to evade the torpedo when the weapon exploded and threw them from the ship into the water. There were 9 officers and men with O'Kane outside and 1 in the body of the conning tower who managed to make it out. 10 men went into the water. 8 hours later, 3 were pulled out of the water by a Japanese transport. The others drowned, exhausted. One of the survivors was O'Kane, who now found himself a prisoner of war, POW. Of the rest of the crew, 30 surviving men were trapped in the forward section of the Tang, which sank and struck the bottom at 180 feet. They planned on escaping through a hatch specifically designed for the purpose, but could not do so immediately because they were depth-charged by a Japanese naval vessel. Sometime later, those who had not succumbed to wounds and were able to move escaped the sub with the use of the Momsen lung, a primitive air supply device that basically recycled already breathed air. This was an escape device only and had never been used in a real emergency by any U.S. crew. Of the 13 men who exited the sub, only 9 reached the surface. Of these, a further 4 drowned before Japanese ships picked up the remaining men. For the action described above, Commander Richard O'Kane was awarded the Medal of Honor, but his story did not end there. Aboard the Japanese rescue ship, survivors of the ships they had sunk beat O'Kane and his officers. After the war was over, O'Kane related that when he and his shipmates realized that the men beating them had been on a ship they had sunk, we found we could take it, the beating, with less prejudice. Spending 10 months in Japanese captivity, O'Kane and his surviving crew were released when the war ended, undernourished and in ill health. After the war, O'Kane was promoted to captain, and on retirement in 1957 to rear admiral. He held a variety of posts in the submarine fleet, including the commander of a submarine squadron in the mid-1950s. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, submarines today are named after states, USS O'Kane was commissioned in 1998. O'Kane was an avid cribbage player, and his cribbage board, by tradition, is posted in the oldest submarine in the active U.S. fleet. When that boat is retired, the next oldest boat gets the honor. Admiral Richard O'Kane died on February 16, 1995. He is buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
And that was Chapter 5 of World War II Heroes, Medal of Honor recipients, and their heroic stories of bravery. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.